what I should do is probably just give an introduction to the work. So I'm just going to zip through these images. As Jane rightly pointed out, I work with various materials, aluminium, acrylic, work with installation, neon, and generally, I suppose I utilize skills that maybe have been picked up from my journey: bronze, casting, installation. Oh, sorry, I'm going a bit quick. Installation, industrially produced objects, installation, object making, singular object making as well as interventions into space and maquettes. I love maquettes. God, it's like Lego again. But yeah, I love that stuff. Right, so I'll start here. And I'd like to start my talk by saying that I actually hate sculpture. Seriously. I mean, just look at this forlorn thing tucked away at the Tetley. It's actually a sculpture by the artist Nika Nilova. Look, just a slim plastic sheet is sparing its blushes, keeping it from being exposed to the elements. I mean, seriously, we wouldn't treat our mothers like this. But, so, this is the many parts of the installation Bus to Move that the Tetley kindly let me store before taking it up to the workplace in Gateshead. The show opens tonight at 6, so if you're not doing anything. But the question is, where am I going to store all this stuff when the show comes to an end? It was these two naked sculptural moments that made me think I hate sculpture. I had a recent conversation with somebody who said, it's not the sculpture you should have a gripe with, it's the artists that have the gumption to make it in the first place. So in reality, I should hate myself. So what is this thing I hate so much? Sculpture. Physical, cumbersome, awkward, lumpen, brusque. Yes, it's all these things that I hate, but it's also the same things that I love, and much more. It's dexterity, the dramatic, its articulateness, its boldness, its expansive quality, its pose. That's what I'm drawn to. As makers, what gives us the right to take up space? Is it something we learn? Is it done out of necessity? Are we products of our environment? I guess our sculpture, our work, synthesizes and speaks of us. It's innate. So I was born in Huddersfield, a large town just 20 minutes from here. When retracing my steps or considering the long journey that brought me to this point, I tried to think how Yorkshire and its distinct vernacular may have affected me. I tried to retrace pivotal moments in my life that may have encouraged me to be a maker. Now, maker might seem a dirty word. In fact, artists, sculptors might be offended by the term. But up to this day, I was a maker for more years than I've been an artist. So depending on my particular frame of mind or my temperament on a given day, I choose to own the term. Where I'm going to begin is an early memory that, in hindsight, might be considered a sculptural memory. It wasn't till years later that I realized my father, when he arrived in this country as a young man, had practiced as a tailor. That is, until I arrived on the scene, and he was forced to find work in the local textile mills. As kids, what we enjoyed most was the time he spent making clothes, something that obviously gave him pride, enjoyment, and lastly, gave him a sense of self away from the monotony of the mill. He set about his work in the hallowed space of the living room, whose furniture, fixtures, fittings seemed to be glued down Such was their integral composition to the room. But like a Bond villain, there was a swiftness to the way the room was suddenly transformed into a workspace. Even this act was quite revolutionary in of itself. The act of reconfiguring space, making the space multi-purpose. The sofa pushed forward and a large green baize table was erected. Upon it, he would unfurl large amounts of cloth that would drop to the ground and act as dens and hideouts to play in. But he was seeing him in the act of analyzing, touching, sewing, drawing, cutting, and modeling. In essence, turning the 2D into 3D that was impressive. Turning the idea in his head into a physical object, sculpture, and armor that operated in the world. It was this transformative potential of a material and the workmanship that stood out for me. This town, Huddersfield, this is Huddersfield train station, by the way. This town, Huddersfield, nestled deep within the Pennines, proud industrial legacy, wishing to expand, to push beyond the boundaries, uneasy with its place, uneasy with itself, its neurosis, my neurosis. This is Huddersfield train station. As young adults, we used to congregate outside. From the vista at George Square, further down from here, you could admire the expanse, its presence, its solidness, as you got closer to it. It was a bold architectural statement, and still is. I suppose at the time, I didn't have the tools to describe what I was experiencing, but it was the only place in Huddersfield that you could perform everyday acts like walking, and they would look infinitely more dramatic with the train station as a backdrop. It made you feel special. Dressed in our best threads, we would occasionally take photos and pose outside, hoping that its grandeur, its confidence would somehow rub off on us. It was years later, while I was studying, that I would come across the writings of the architectural historian Nicholas Pesner, in which he praised the building, as did the poet John Betjeman. I felt justified by reading these texts. There was something physical in my relationship to that building, beyond its function, that at the time I was unable to articulate. It was a bold statement of intent. In fact, looking at the state of Leeds Station today, it still is. Look, I had to get that one in. So yeah, let's see. Boom. The Yorkshire landscape. The Yorkshire landscape is so dramatic, but I wouldn't live here, which is a quote I overheard on a train the other day. My father often recounts the memory of arriving in Yorkshire from the Caribbean and being able, with his peers, to walk up a hill, get to the top, and just about pick out amongst the dank fog the tall chimneys from the mills, expelling their hot steam. It was at this point that they would map the mill's position before descending the many miles down the valley to find that mill and ask for work. These same mills now stand as mausoleums to an outdated technology, redundant punctuations in the landscape. I guess what struck me about this small vignette was not only the physical overcoming of the landscape, but it was a way of articulating the landscape that drew more on a functional necessity. In reality, this tale reveals the story of mass immigration and a British textile industry in the midst of taking its last breath. But to be honest, it's not so much the landscape that I'm interested in, but the human endeavor that has managed through innovation to surmount it, pierce it, shape it, reconfigure it, work in tandem with it, work around it, carve through it. This is the language of sculpture, sculpture on a vast scale. It's a direct human relation with a material that is a testament to expansion, technology, curiosity, and yes, it still turns me on. Driving through Yorkshire and beyond, through this vast web of arterial roads, motorways, bridges, and electricity transmission towers, I was and still am enthralled that this technology, as new as it was yesterday, still persists. Some of the best installations I've seen are in the belly of a workshop. The whole language of sculpture is encompassed within these spaces that can range from giant aircraft hangars to small industrial units, sheds and outhouses. In fact, sometimes it can be a combination of all three and acts as a testament to the ad hoc development of a company, or maybe, just maybe, to serve as a way of telling a story of the company's advancement. Assemblage, carving, casting, modeling, mapping, constructing, welding. Before I had a sculptural language to call my own, I was aware of these processes. I was aware of the detritus that might form across the floor or be the residue of a reductive process yet to be swept up. These might be termed scatter pieces. I was aware of the way that highly finished components, simplified forms were collected and stacked to reduce space, minimalism, or wrapped in shrink wrap to protect them from the elements as they were put on the back of a truck. Christo and John Claude. Before I had a sculptural language to call my own, I was aware of these processes that had, for me, an aesthetic potential. I entered manufacturing straight out of school, which was a daunting process for a young boy. There was a pervading masculinity, a grittiness made of myth and stark conditions that within the factory seeped into every molecule. It was the way that you physically held yourself, your pose, your stance, the way that you spoke, the way that you ate, the way you opened your newspaper, the way you picked up and handled objects. But more importantly, what this time gave me was the skills and the confidence to make things, to be engaged and engrossed in complex problem solving. As well as the pressure to physically hold yourself, there was an onus on the ability to mentally hold your own, a pride in being sharp. You were constantly being challenged, a need to justify your position, your existence. It led to innovation, improvisation, speculation, and better solutions. The experience gave me a familiarity with varied material processes, machine technology, batch production, automated production, regulated shapes and sizes, surfaces, and finishing processes. All these tend to end up somehow in, a process through my work. It gave me an appreciation of scale and size, weight and presence. At times you could manhandle objects, but the fear you got when they showed your frailty, your inane fleshness, was frightening. To build something with more presence than yourself is scary, but also liberating, in as far as the impetus it gave me to create some of the installations I have conceived. These formative experiences have been vital. I tend to use and seek out smaller companies. They tend to be more versatile, more dynamic. I found that larger companies, who generally tend to invest heavily in newer cutting-edge technology, are more evasive, more secretive about what they do. In fact, it's a closed unit. If they do entertain a conversation with you, inevitably the question they tend to ask is about the numbers. How many? A company set up for batch work and large production turnaround is unlikely to want to produce a one-off product. The relationship with smaller companies is much different. I have found sometimes it's all about confidence. You have an innate knowledge of modes of production, tools and materials, and are conversant with the vernacular of those industries, then it ultimately helps. Communication, like in all industries, is key. As a maker that has gone through art school, it was very easy to go into the workshops and have a conversation about a particular thing that I wanted to make. Why? Well, like most of the fabricators that have a close relationship to the arts industry, and I'm talking specifically about London here, there is a good chance that they also went to art school. They either fell into fabrication because they were already conversant with making and sought employment in a wide market, or they saw a gap in the market and decided they had the discipline to make a business of it. Again, this is London, where the industry largely dwells. But the amount of time I've met framers, been to casting shops, visited fabricators, and inevitably, they have all been through art school. Not everybody that goes to art school can sustain themselves as an artist, but there seems to be a larger industry down in London that is able to absorb a surplus. Coming back to Leeds, the industry is naturally smaller here. Naturally smaller here. And there are just enough artists here that there might be a surplus that would consider going into fabrication there is not enough artists here that there might be a surplus that would consider going into fabrication in order to serve those artists. I think it's also about ideas of prestige and goes back to this earlier idea of being a maker. Many artists might balk at the idea of being a maker as it might be detrimental to their art over the idea of them seeing themselves as an artist. It comes down to status and the misconceived idea that an artist thinks through making and the maker just makes, which is misleading. Class also has a factor to play, I feel, especially here in Britain, where manufacturing, making things, or the worker has never really been celebrated, nor given heroic status, unlike in America. Even the art of America of a certain generation, through the incorporation and mimicking of industrial processes, paid homage to its country's industrial advance. Making just isn't sexy here. It lacks luster. Here in Britain. Being considered the workshop of the world just doesn't cut it now. Oh, how did I get in there? Right. When Britain has excelled in making, it has been when it has fused making with innovation, a la Clive Sinclair. Okay, maybe not that one. Or James Dyson, or maybe Thomas Heatherwick. What they all have in common is a vivid imagination and a force of nature to see their ideas conceived. So maybe there is an untapped potential in the artist working closer with the smaller scale company, a sort of innovation that can meld these different qualities of functionality and speculation. It is something that I've been aware of in my own dealings with smaller companies. In my experience, if you're stuck for explaining what it is you want to make or produce, there is a good chance that they will invite you through the office to the workshop. This is invaluable, not just as a lived experience, but the fact that you get a sense of how things are put together and developed, and becoming privy to processes that may have laid untapped. It might be that you came into the establishment with a specific thing in mind, but if you can infuse that person enough, I find, it can play into their own sense of pride in the company that they work for or own. You can turn a corner where suddenly they are in a position to invest in your ideas and get to grips with the problems to be solved. It becomes a collaboration where you bounce off each other, are comfortable in their presence to want to speculate, testing their perceived assumptions of their field of expertise. This can have immediate consequences: the ability to increase your own material knowledge, the development of a working relationship that is reflexive to both your needs and the resources, whilst unlocking a potential for the scope of your work that works in tandem with your own ambition. I'll finish. Yeah, that was Thomas Heatherwick. I didn't push enough. Right, I'll finish there, and thank you very much.